The clause says the seller indemnifies the buyer. That is the tempting part to remember because it is clean, short, and sounds like the answer. But 5 lines later, the same section says the cap does not apply in cases of fraud. That carve-out is smaller on the page, but it controls the conclusion. That second sentence is the job. If the workflow loses it, the later answer can still sound legal while being wrong. Now watch what a prompt memory system does to the source. It starts with separate objects, then pressures them into a single smooth piece of prose. Worker 1 reads the clause and writes a safe summary. Seller indemnifies buyer, subject to the fraud carve-out. At this moment, the caveat is still alive. Worker 2 receives a shorter summary. The carve-out thread is cut. The sentence gets cleaner, but the protection has disappeared. This is the dangerous trade. The prose becomes easier to pass along at the exact moment it becomes less faithful to the deal. Worker 3 answers from that compressed memory. The answer is confident. The confidence is the problem because the missing caveat is no longer visible. Nothing dramatic happened. No model announced that it had lost the exception. The system just kept making the memory cleaner. And that is how the memory becomes false. Not through noise, but through polite compression that deletes the object that mattered. The quote, caveat, source thread, confidence, instruction, open question, and audit trail were forced into one string. One string is doing too many jobs. It has to preserve evidence, express uncertainty, carry instructions, remember provenance, and still sound like a readable answer. When that string gets summarized, there is no protected slot for the thing that must survive. The carve-out has nowhere durable to live. Summarization is not memory. It is deletion with good manners. The prose looks calm while the controlling object is gone. So do not ask the next model to remember the carve-out from prose. Give the carve-out its own slot before the handoff happens. The important move is made at right time, before a later worker has the chance to smooth it away. In Iris, the claim and the carve-out are not one smooth sentence. The claim is one entry. The carve-out is another entry. That separation is what lets the workflow preserve disagreement instead of laundering it into confident prose. The source thread stays attached, and confidence is stored as a field. The reviewer can inspect where the claim came from and how certain the worker was. The carve-out can also become a blocker. If a final answer ignores it, the gate closes before the answer ships. The system is not asking a reviewer to notice a missing caveat after the fact. It is making the missing caveat operational. Now the handoff changes. The next worker does not inherit a polished paragraph. It inherits the actual objects that the workflow has to preserve. That object set includes the claim, the caveat, the source, the confidence, and the blocker. It is smaller than the full source but more faithful than a summary. If the next worker tries to write the wrong answer, the blocker is still there. The system routes the answer back to the carve-out instead of trusting the prose. That is the point of typed memory. It is not memory because it is longer. It is memory because the important objects stay separate. A larger window can hold the lost sentence. It still will not protect it unless the system writes the exception as its own object. Context gives the model a chance to see the sentence. Memory decides whether the sentence survives the workflow. The window does not know that a 5-line exception should outrank a clean 1-line summary. The memory layer has to make that decision. That decision has to happen when memory is written. Quote, carve-out, source thread, confidence, and blocker become durable before the next worker sees them. If the exception survives as its own object, the workflow can use it. The answer gate sees the carve-out before finalization. The clause is no longer background text. It is an active constraint on what the system is allowed to say. If it disappears into prose, the next worker has to guess that something is missing. And guessing is exactly what the system was supposed to avoid. The whole point of the memory layer is to make the important object visible without making every worker reread the whole source. The model did not need a nicer summary. It needed the missing clause to still be alive. That is why Iris treats the clause as state, not decoration. The marketing point is not that Iris writes prettier prose. It is that the controlling evidence remains usable after the prose is written.